You might not expect a spring holiday to feel like a piece of paperwork, but it often does. Not the exciting kind of paperwork either. The kind that says must be done annually with a stamp, a signature, and a small sigh. Imagine a brass band warming up in the chilly air, not quite in tune yet, just enough sound to suggest confidence. Imagine lilac petals on the curb, pale and soft, and a radio announcer smiling with his voice because that is what radio voices do. And in the background, the city keeps being a city, with buses and coats and people looking at their watches as if time itself can be negotiated. May Day is supposed to arrive on schedule, like a train that has been practicing punctuality for months. In many places, it looks the same. Banners, speeches, children in hats that are brighter than they need to be, and adults pretending they are not cold. It is a holiday that depends on repetition. The calendar demands it, and the calendar is famously stubborn. In Kyiv and other towns, spring air can feel clean enough to trust, and that trust becomes part of the ritual. You step outside and the air smells like damp pavement, new leaves, and the faint promise that winter is done complaining. You don't ask the air for its credentials. You just breathe it in, the way you always do, without a committee vote. Radiation also has no interest in being theatrical. It does not announce itself with color. It rides the wind the way pollen does, patient and almost polite, drifting where air currents drift, as if it is simply following the rules of physics and trying not to bother anyone. Rumors, however, are faster than measurements, because rumors can sprint without taking notes. Measurements move slower than decisions because measurements like paperwork, and paperwork likes waiting. Some people notice small changes, close parks, odd cautions, a sudden softness in official voices that usually prefer steel. A few windows stay shut when they would normally be open. A few parents hesitate and then stop hesitating because hesitation can feel like a private rebellion. And then the order arrives, the neat little sentence that does so much work without using many words. The celebration goes on. The holiday is, in a way, a performance that has already been booked, and nobody wants to cancel the show. There are schedules, there are routes, there are expectations. There are people who have practiced standing in lines, and they do not want to waste their practice. The city continues because continuing is what cities do, and because stopping requires permission, and permission can be a very slow animal. So the morning becomes a careful kind of ordinary. Officials want crowds visible because visibility is proof that the state is steady, proof that panic is unnecessary, proof that the story is still the story with the correct punctuation. Teachers line children up as if children are a renewable resource, which, in the logic of large systems, they often are. Factories march in blocks because blocks are easier to count than individuals. Slogans are carried like furniture that must be moved every year, awkward, heavy, and somehow familiar, even if you don't remember where you put it last time. There is a particular flavor of public joy that is practiced more than it is felt. It is not fake exactly. It is disciplined, smiles that hold still, clapping that arrives on cue. The kind of enthusiasm that has been ironed flat so it fits into a parade route. Parents are told not to worry, and worry becomes impolite, like coughing in a theater during the quiet part. You can cough, of course, but everyone will notice, and nobody wants to be noticed for the wrong reason. The city learns that the safest emotion is the one that matches the posture. If you are still awake by the time we reach the part where adults carry identical flags at identical angles, you can subscribe. Or don't, it's fine. The banners will march either way, and I will never know what you decided, which is strangely soothing. There are also instructions, so many instructions, and they are all delivered with the calm confidence of someone reading a recipe. Stand here, walk there, smile now, don't break formation. Don't ask the sort of question that opens a door you can't close. It is remarkable how quickly humans can turn into a coordinated visual effect, like pixels. A parade is, in that sense, a living photograph, arranged, rehearsed, and meant to be viewed from a distance where details blur into a pleasing shape. And most marchers have no clear information, only atmosphere. Spring light, music, the slight pressure to behave as if everything is fine, because behaving can sometimes feel like controlling. People hold bouquets because bouquets are light and harmless and smell like a normal life. They hold balloons because balloons make children quiet for a few minutes, which is one of civilization's hidden goals. Some families keep their windows shut but still send children out, because that is how rules become reflex. You don't argue with the reflex. You just do it the way you lock your door without remembering the motion. Somewhere far to the north, though, a reactor has already rewritten the weather with invisible ink. That is the strange thing about radiation as a concept. It does not arrive wearing a costume, no dramatic cape, no villain laugh. It is more like a quiet administrative change that nobody announced over the loudspeaker. People still put up decorations because decorations are visible, and visibility is comforting. They rehearse songs because songs can be heard, and hearing something familiar can make you feel like the world is still normal enough to be trusted. You breathe in 4, out 6, and the street smells like flowers, not morning, which is one of spring's more confusing habits. The cloud overhead is not dramatic. It is ordinary air doing ordinary air things. It doesn't hover with intention. It doesn't point at anyone. It doesn't have a villain name that you can whisper. It is simply there, mixed into the sky the way smoke can be mixed into fabric, unnoticed until the smell reaches you later. The quiet horror, if we must use that word, and we will use it softly, is how little the body can feel while it is being exposed. The body is not a very good detective. It doesn't give you a warning label. It just keeps breathing, because breathing is what bodies do with admirable stubbornness. In a system built on hierarchy, bad news travels vertically before it travels outward. It moves up like a file folder passed from desk to desk, through reports and approvals and signatures, the way a small problem becomes a large administrative object. Local officials wait for Moscow. Moscow waits for certainty. Certainty in this story is always late, like a friend who says they're 5 minutes away and means 30. Admitting danger publicly risks looking weak, and weakness is treated as contagious, which is a curious metaphor for a government that is afraid of metaphors. So the message that reaches the street becomes very simple. Continue. Continue walking. Continue clapping. Continue being visible. Continue being calm. Continue being the kind of citizen who does not cause paperwork. There's a special stillness inside that word continue, because it asks for motion without thought. It is the verbal equivalent of a conveyor belt. And when people are tired and cold and full of spring air, a conveyor belt can feel like relief. You don't have to decide, you just move. Information, meanwhile, has a strange habit of becoming quieter as it becomes more important. A whisper is safer than an announcement. A suggestion is safer than a warning. A pause in conversation can carry more meaning than a speech if everyone has learned how to listen for pauses. You can almost imagine danger as something that has to pass through layers of fabric, and each layer muffles it a little more, until what reaches the outside is only a soft shape, hard to recognize. And yet, on the private level, people are always building small defenses, because humans love improvisation, especially when official instructions are vague. Some doctors and engineers whisper advice in kitchens, where steam from tea can make everything feel momentarily gentle. Wash hands, avoid rain. Keep children indoors if you can, which is an instruction children famously enjoy. If you cannot keep them indoors, at least wipe shoes. Wipe coats. Wipe the invisible from the visible, which is an almost poetic project, and also a slightly absurd one, like trying to mop up fog. A few people improvise protections that sound like folk rituals: wet cloths, extra baths, boots left outside, coats brushed as if dust is a personal insult. Someone might scrub a windowsill with the seriousness usually reserved for moral cleansing. In some apartments, the air feels like it has been negotiated with. Windows closed, curtains drawn, the world reduced to what you can control. But most defenses are psychological because psychological defenses are cheap and require no supplies. Don't think too hard. Don't talk too loud. Don't be the first to panic. The most common shield, in the end, is ignorance issued without consent, like an unwanted newsletter that keeps arriving. Days later, the celebration can start to look unreal in memory, like a photograph taken seconds before a storm. People remember the music, the banners, the specific shade of spring light, and then they remember what that light was carrying. Evacuations expand. Iodine becomes a word people learn too late, and once you learn it, you hear it everywhere, like a new song stuck in your head. Official statements slowly change their shape, the way a person changes their story when they realize you already know the ending. The shift is not sudden. It is gradual, like turning a dial and pretending you didn't. Health effects are complicated and uneven, which makes the story easier to argue about and harder to grieve cleanly. Numbers appear, and numbers always look tidy, even when they describe something untidy. There are charts, there are studies, there are debates. There are people who want certainty because certainty is comforting, and there are people who want the simplest version of events because simplicity is easier to carry than nuance. Meanwhile, daily life keeps happening because daily life is relentless and not particularly respectful of historical significance. Someone still has to buy bread. Someone still has to wash a cup. Someone still has to convince a child to do homework, which is its own quiet disaster. What remains clear, though, is a feeling that a city was asked to perform calm in a moment that needed truth. Not loud truth, not cinematic truth, just plain truth. The kind that would have sounded almost boring if it had been spoken early enough. The tragedy of many systems is that they are very good at staging normal, even when normal is no longer accurate. They can produce banners. They can produce slogans. They can produce a marching route with excellent logistics. Producing honesty is oddly harder. Honesty has no uniform. So for bedtime, let's make a small loaf. Soft and practical, like something you would promise yourself while adjusting the pillow. Keep facts in one jar: dates, orders, parades, the ordinary mechanics of public life. Keep emotion in another: fear, anger, the dull ache of being misled, the weird embarrassment of realizing you trusted the air. And if authority insists on normal, ask what problem normal is meant to hide. Not with shouting, not with drama, just with the quiet curiosity you might use when reading a confusing instruction manual. Tomorrow, remember the simplest lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous cloud is the one you are told not to look for, because it isn't shaped like danger. It's shaped like weather. The band packs up its instruments with tired hands. The banners fold into rectangles. The street returns to quiet. The lilacs keep doing their lilac thing, completely uninterested in politics. And the air keeps its invisible memory, drifting gently through the city, as if it could go on forever, as if you could keep listening forever, as if the whole world could soften into a steady, sleepy hum and simply continue. You might not expect a spring holiday to depend so heavily on paperwork, but May Day often does. In the same way a school photo depends on someone insisting everybody stands in the correct place. Somewhere a brass band warms up, not heroically, just practically, with the slow patience of people who know they will be heard whether they are ready or not. Lilac petals drift along the curb like small, confused confetti, and a radio announcer smiles with his voice, because radio is mostly confidence poured into sound. The city looks like spring. The calendar says it is spring. And so, with the calm certainty of a stamp hitting an ink pad, spring is declared. Where and what time are you listening from? May Day is supposed to look the same everywhere. Banners, speeches, children in bright hats that are always slightly too big, as if the hats are preparing for a longer life than the children are. Adults standing in lines with the quiet endurance of people waiting for a bus that will arrive eventually because it has to. In Kyiv and other towns, the air can feel clean enough to trust, and trusting it becomes part of the ritual, like tying your shoes without checking the knots. You step outside and inhale damp pavement, budding leaves, and that pale spring smell that says, gently, winter has run out of arguments. You do not ask the air any questions. You let it happen. Far to the north, though, a reactor has already rewritten the weather with invisible ink, which is a very unfair way to treat a season that was simply trying to be pleasant. Radiation does not arrive with a color. It does not ring a bell. It does not walk up to you and introduce itself like a stranger at a party. It rides the wind the way pollen does, quietly and patiently, drifting as if it has nowhere else to be. The strange part is that the senses do not get invited to this information. Your eyes do not see it. Your nose does not smell it. Your skin does not raise a hand and say, "Excuse me, this seems unwise." Spring air still feels like spring air, and the city still smells like flowers, not warning, which is one of nature's more inconvenient habits. Rumors move faster than measurements, because rumors can sprint without stopping to calibrate themselves. Measurements move slower than decisions, because measurements like accuracy, and accuracy takes time, and time is not always considered a polite request. Some people notice small changes, closed parks, odd cautions, sudden silences where official voices used to fill the space with certainty. A few windows stay shut. A few people stop letting children splash in puddles. Not because puddles have suddenly become philosophical, but because someone said something in a hallway, and the hallway said it onward. And then the most powerful thing arrives, an order that is simple enough to fit inside a breath. The celebration goes on. It is remarkable how often human life is governed by the phrase "carry on," as if history is a moving walkway at an airport, and the polite choice is to stand still and let it take you where it was already going. The holiday has already been scheduled, already rehearsed, already printed on posters and announced in that calm public tone that makes everything sound normal. Normal is comforting, normal is also convenient. And so the city continues because continuing is what cities do, and because stopping requires permission, and permission can be an expensive animal. So the morning becomes a careful kind of ordinary. Officials want crowds visible because visibility is proof that the state is steady, proof that panic is unnecessary, proof that nothing has changed in a way that can be photographed. Teachers line children up, and children behave the way children behave, which is to say they wiggle with determination and then suddenly become statues when someone says, "Hold still." Factory workers march in blocks because blocks are easier to count than individuals, and counting is one of the quiet hobbies of large systems. Slogans are carried like furniture that must be moved every year, heavy, awkward, and strangely familiar, as if you've seen this couch before and you still don't know why it's in your living room. There is music, and music is a useful tool because it fills the air with something you can actually hear. Drums do not lie. Tubas do not whisper. A brass band is very honest about the fact that it exists. The city leans into that honesty because it would rather focus on the sound than on the unsaid. People clap in time, and clapping is comforting because it has rules. Hands meet, separate, meet again. A small rhythm that says, "We are here, we are together, we are doing the correct thing at the correct moment." If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. Honestly, the banners will march either way, and I will never know what you chose, which is one of the gentler mysteries in life. Parents are told not to worry, and worry becomes impolite, like coughing in a theater during the quiet part. You can cough, of course, but everyone will notice, and nobody wants to be noticed for the wrong reason. The city learns the soft discipline of public joy, smiles that hold still, laughter that arrives on cue, applause that does not wander. It is not fake exactly, it is rehearsed. It is a performance of normal, and normal is treated like a civic duty. And most marchers have no clear information, only atmosphere. Spring light, music, the slightly sweet smell of lilacs and exhaust, the sense that asking questions is rude, not because questions are sinful, but because questions create delays, and delays create paperwork, and paperwork creates meetings, and meetings create more delays, and nobody wants to start that machine. Some families keep their windows shut but still send children out because that is how rules become reflex. It is the same logic as checking a box on a form without reading the paragraph above it. You just do it because the box exists and the box expects you. The cloud overhead is not dramatic. It is ordinary air doing ordinary air things. It does not point at anyone. It does not hover with intention. It does not look like a villain in a film because villains in films are very considerate about being recognized. This cloud is inconsiderate. It blends in. It drifts. It moves like weather, which is exactly the problem. The quiet horror, if we keep that word soft and small, is how little the body can feel while it is being exposed. The body is not a very good detective. It does not send you a notification. It simply continues its routines, faithful and stubborn, because routines are what bodies do best. When the parade ends, people fold banners with the neatness of people folding laundry. Someone gathers paper cups. Someone collects stray pens and ribbon scraps. A child complains about itchy tights. Another child is hungry in that very specific way children get hungry after standing still for a long time, as if their bodies have suddenly remembered they are alive. Life returns to its normal shape, and that is the strange part. Normal does not always wait for truth. Normal can arrive early and set the table. In a system built on hierarchy, bad news travels vertically before it travels outward. It moves up like a file folder passed from desk to desk. Reports, approvals, signatures. Not because anyone is necessarily evil, but because the system is designed to treat information like property, and property needs owners. Local officials wait for Moscow. Moscow waits for certainty. Certainty arrives late, wearing the tired expression of someone who missed the bus. Admitting danger publicly risks looking weak, and weakness is treated as contagious, which is an interesting metaphor for a government that does not enjoy metaphors unless it controls them. So the message that reaches the street becomes very simple. Continue walking, continue working, continue keeping your voice at the correct volume, continue being visible because visibility is proof. It is almost like a sign taped to the refrigerator, do not forget to buy milk. Continue as if continuing is a household chore. Information that does leak out does so in the softest ways. A whisper in a stairwell. A quick sentence exchanged at a market stall between carrots and potatoes. Advice delivered in kitchens where tea steam makes everything feel briefly gentle and domestic. Wash hands. Avoid rain. Keep children indoors if you can. Words that sound like common sense, which makes them both comforting and alarming. A few people improvise protections that resemble folk rituals. Wet cloths, extra baths, boots left outside, coats brushed like they're being judged. Someone wipes a windowsill with more seriousness than they wipe their own worries, because worries are harder to clean. There are also the psychological defenses, because psychological defenses are cheap and available in unlimited supply. Don't think too deeply. Don't think too hard. Don't talk too loud. Don't be the first to panic. These are the kinds of rules that arrive without being printed. The way a room can go quiet without anyone announcing, now we will be quiet. In the end, the most common shield is ignorance issued without consent, like an unwanted newsletter that keeps arriving in your mailbox with the same cheerful font. People use it because it is there, because it is light to carry, and because it lets you keep making dinner as if dinner is still the main problem. And of course, there are still official voices, still public statements, still the careful architecture of calm. Calm is treated like a public resource. Calm is something you're expected to contribute, like keeping your shoes clean in someone else's hallway. So when someone hints at danger, the system responds the way systems often do. It tries to smooth the hint into something flatter, something safer, something that can be repeated without causing inconvenience. That is one of the strangest details about large disasters. They don't only create new problems, they also create new kinds of language, and the language is often designed to be smaller than the reality. Meanwhile, life continues its small chores. Someone scrubs a pot. Someone sweeps a stairwell. A bus driver stops at the same corner as always. The city keeps producing ordinary moments because ordinary moments are renewable. Even in the days after the parade, the air still feels like air, which is infuriatingly consistent. You can stand by an open window and hear birds, and the birds do not sing differently because the humans are worried. The world does not always change its tone to match our fear. It just stays in its own key. Sometimes a detail becomes important only because it is boring. Like rain. Rain is usually a background character. It arrives, it leaves, it makes sidewalks glossy and coats heavy. But now rain becomes suspicious, like a familiar neighbor who started acting strange. People notice puddles. They notice dust. They notice the way a child's shoes track mud into the kitchen. They notice things they used to ignore, and that noticing is exhausting, because noticing has no off switch. It's like trying to sleep while your phone keeps lighting up, except the phone is your mind. If you listen closely to how people talk in these moments, you can hear the shape of caution. They don't say, "There's danger." They say, "Maybe don't let the kids play outside too long." They don't say, "The air is not safe." They say, "It might be better to keep the windows closed tonight." And the word tonight is not dramatic here. It's just practical, like saying, "Tonight we will put the leftovers in the fridge." The caution folds itself into routine, because routine is the only place it can hide without being challenged. Then, slowly, the music stops, and what remains is the sound of people remembering. Days later, the celebration looks unreal in memory, like a photograph taken seconds before a storm. You can almost see it. Banners mid-swing, a child mid-step, a band mid-note, and above it all, the ordinary sky doing ordinary sky things. Evacuations expand. Maps are drawn and redrawn, and maps are always so calm about everything, with their neat lines and their confident circles. Iodine becomes a word people learn too late, and once you learn it, you hear it everywhere, like a new song stuck in your head, except the song is medical and slightly bitter. Official statements shift slowly, changing shape the way a person changes their story when they realize you already know part of it. First, the statements are certain, then they become careful. Then they become full of phrases like "as a precaution," which is a phrase that sounds reassuring until you realize it means "we are not entirely sure, but we would like you to behave as if we are." The city's relationship with trust becomes complicated, and complication is tiring because complication requires thought. Health effects are complicated and uneven, which makes the story easier to argue about and harder to grieve cleanly. Numbers appear, and numbers always look tidy even when they describe something untidy. There are charts. There are studies. There are debates that feel like people trying to fold fog into a square. Some want certainty because certainty is comforting. Others want the simplest version of events because simplicity is easier to carry than nuance. Meanwhile, daily life keeps happening because daily life is relentless and not particularly respectful of historical significance. Someone still has to buy bread. Someone still has to wash a cup. Someone still has to tell a child to do homework, which, in its own way, is a crisis that arrives every day on schedule. What remains clear is a feeling that a city was asked to perform calm in a moment that needed truth, not loud truth, not cinematic truth, just plain truth, the boring kind that might have sounded almost ordinary if it had been spoken early enough. There is something quietly tragic about how good systems can be at staging normal, even when normal is no longer accurate. They can produce banners, they can produce slogans, they can produce a parade route with excellent logistics. They can produce a brass band that knows exactly when to begin and exactly when to stop. Producing honesty is harder, perhaps because honesty doesn't march in straight lines. So for bedtime, let's make a small oath, soft and practical, like something you promise yourself while adjusting a pillow. Keep facts in one jar: dates, orders, parades, the ordinary mechanics of public life, the way a holiday is assembled like a set piece. Keep emotion in another: fear, anger, the dull ache of being misled, the strange embarrassment of realizing you trusted the air without question, the way everyone does until they can't. And when authority insists on normal, ask what problem normal is meant to hide, not with shouting, not with urgency, just with the quiet curiosity you might use when reading an instruction manual that seems to be missing a page. Tomorrow, remember the simplest lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous cloud is the one you are told not to look for, because it isn't shaped like danger, it's shaped like weather. The band packs up. Someone wipes the mouthpiece of a trumpet as if cleanliness can erase memory. The banners fold into rectangles and disappear into storage, where they will wait patiently for the next time the calendar demands a performance. The street returns to quiet. Lilacs keep doing their lilac thing, completely uninterested in politics. And the air keeps its invisible memory, drifting gently through the city, as if it could go on forever, as if you could keep listening forever, as if the world could soften into a steady, sleepy hum and simply continue. You might not expect a public holiday to keep its appointment with the calendar, even when the weather has been quietly rewritten, but holidays are stubborn like that. They arrive the way a bus arrives on schedule, regardless of who is sitting inside it, and regardless of what the air has decided to carry. In late spring, the world looks organized. Lilac petals drift into gutters like they're practicing a slow, polite surrender. A brass band warms up somewhere, and every warm-up note sounds like the beginning of something important. Even when it's only the beginning of someone's lips getting comfortable on a mouthpiece, and if your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the fan hum if it's humming. Let the blankets do their quiet job. Whisper to yourself, if you like, where you are listening from, and what time it is where you are, because time zones are the gentlest form of geography. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe, or don't. I will never know. I will just keep talking softly into the dark, like a historian who has misplaced the concept of urgency and is not particularly interested in finding it again. May Day is supposed to look the same almost everywhere it is staged. It has a familiar costume: banners, speeches, children in bright hats, a city pretending it has no doubts. The point of ritual is repetition, and repetition is calming, like hearing the same lullaby again and again until your brain stops trying to predict a surprise ending. In Kyiv and other towns, spring air can feel clean enough to trust, and that trust becomes part of the performance. You step outside and the street smells like damp stone, fresh paint, and the first serious attempt at flowers. You breathe in because breathing is automatic, and because the body has not been hired as a consultant for political decisions. But far to the north, a reactor has already rewritten the weather with invisible ink. Invisible ink is always a strange concept because it sounds playful, like a school prank, except here it is not playful, and it is not written on paper. It is written into the wind, and the wind does not sign its name. Radiation does not announce itself with color. It rides air the way pollen does, quietly and patiently, drifting without needing permission. If it had a personality, it would be the kind that shows up early, says nothing, and sits in the corner of the room while everyone pretends not to notice. The truly unfair detail is how normal everything can still look while something abnormal is happening. The sky remains very committed to being a sky. Rumors move faster than measurements, and measurements move slower than decisions. This is not because people are lazy. It's because systems have steps, and steps have paperwork, and paperwork has a talent for making time feel thick. Some people notice only small changes at first closed parks, strange cautions, a sudden crispness in official voices, as if everyone has agreed to speak with their backs straighter. But the order arrives anyway, the celebration goes on. A parade is not only a line of bodies, it is a statement that the state is steady. And steadiness, like a chair, is something you want other people to see you sitting in. Officials want crowds visible because visibility is proof. Proof that everything is normal. Proof that panic is unnecessary. Proof that the script is still being followed. Teachers line children up. Factories march in blocks. Slogans are carried like furniture that must be moved every year from one storage room to another, because tradition is sometimes just lifting heavy objects again and again. Someone checks a list. Someone checks it twice, not because it is festive, but because bureaucracy is the original holiday ritual. Parents are told not to worry, and worry becomes impolite, like coughing in a theater during a quiet scene. The city learns the soft discipline of public joy, which is joy performed with good posture, and the small, oddly boring details keep piling up, the way they always do when something large is happening. The width of a banner pole, the exact angle of a portrait, the way children as shoes scuff against pavement in a rhythm that sounds like a single long sentence. The way a band's brass instruments catch the light and turn it into brief flashes like metallic blinking. If you have ever watched a parade and thought, this is mostly waiting punctuated by walking, you are correct. A lot of history is waiting punctuated by walking. The problem is that waiting feels safe and walking feels purposeful, and both feelings can be misleading. Most marchers have no clear information, only atmosphere. Spring light, music, the pleasant numbness of being told what to do and doing it. The sense that asking questions is rude, and that being rude is worse than being uncertain. Some families shut windows but still send children out because that is how rules become reflex. You do what is expected because expectations are solid, and invisible things are not. The cloud overhead is not dramatic. It is ordinary air doing ordinary air things. It does not roar. It does not glow. It drifts. The quiet horror, if we can call it that in a bedtime voice, is how little the body can feel while it is being exposed. The body is a very loyal employee. It keeps working even when it should be filing a complaint. Afterward, if you listen to the way people describe those days, you can hear how authority shaped the flow of information. In a system built on hierarchy, bad news travels vertically: reports, approvals, signatures, before it travels to people. Local officials wait for Moscow. Moscow waits for certainty. Certainty arrives late, wearing a coat that has been brushed carefully to look presentable. Admitting danger publicly risks looking weak, and weakness is treated like a contagious illness. So the message to the street becomes, continue. Continue like the parade is a simple mechanical event, like turning a handle, like switching on a light. Continue like the calendar is the most important reactor in the country, and it must not be allowed to melt down. The paperwork of silence is surprisingly elaborate. Silence has forms. Silence has stamps. Silence has meetings where people agree, politely, to keep agreeing. There are phrases designed to be repeated without meaning too much. There are instructions that never quite call themselves instructions. A statement might say there is no reason for concern, which is a phrase that sounds comforting until you realize it is also a request. a request to keep your concern private, a request to stay in line, a request to treat your own senses as unreliable witnesses. And still, beneath the official calm, small private defenses appear because people are not machines, and even machines have emergency protocols. Some doctors and engineers whisper advice in kitchens: wash hands, avoid rain, keep children indoors if you can. It's offered softly, like a recipe shared between friends, except the recipe is for reducing harm. A few people improvise protections: wet cloths, extra baths, boots left outside, coats brushed like they're dusty. If you've ever watched someone vigorously clean something because they feel powerless about a larger problem, you already understand the emotional logic. Cleaning is control you can touch, control you can see, control that fits in a bucket. But most defenses are psychological because the mind is always trying to protect itself from overload. Don't think too hard. Don't talk too loud. Don't be the first to panic. These rules arrive without being printed, the way a room can go quiet without anyone announcing, "Now we will be quiet." In the end, the most common shield is ignorance issued without consent, like an unwanted newsletter that keeps arriving in your mailbox with the same cheerful font. People use it because it is there, because it is light to carry, and because it lets you keep making dinner as if dinner is still the main problem. Then the music stops, and what remains is the slow work of consequences. Days later, the celebration looks unreal in memory, like a photograph taken seconds before a storm. You can almost see it: banners mid-swing, a child mid-step, a band mid-note, and above it all, the ordinary sky doing ordinary sky things. Evacuations expand. Maps are drawn and redrawn, and maps are always so calm about everything, with their neat lines and their confident circles. Iodine becomes a word people learn too late, and once you learn it, you hear it everywhere, like a new song stuck in your head, except the song is medical and slightly bitter. Official statements shift slowly, changing shape the way a person changes their story when they realize you already know part of it. First, the statements are certain. Then they become careful. Then they become full of phrases like "as a precaution," which sounds reassuring until you realize it means "we are not entirely sure, but we would like you to behave as if we are." Health effects are complicated and uneven, which makes the story easier to argue about and harder to grieve cleanly. Numbers appear, and numbers always look tidy even when they describe something untidy. There are charts. There are debates that feel like people trying to fold fog into a square. Meanwhile, life continues its small chores because life is relentless and not particularly respectful of historical significance. What remains clear is a feeling that a city was asked to perform calm in a moment that needed truth. Not loud truth. Not cinematic truth. Just plain truth. The boring kind that might have sounded almost ordinary if it had been spoken early enough. There is something quietly strange about how good systems can be at staging normal, even when no longer accurate. They can produce slogans. They can produce parade routes with excellent logistics. They can produce a brass band that knows exactly when to begin and exactly when to stop. Producing honesty is harder, perhaps because honesty doesn't march in straight lines and cannot be carried on a pole. So for bedtime, let's make a small oath, soft and practical, like something you promise yourself while adjusting a pillow. Keep facts in one jar: dates, orders, parades, the ordinary mechanics of public life, the way a holiday is assembled like a set piece. Keep emotion in another: fear, anger, the dull ache of being misled, the strange embarrassment of realizing you trusted the air without question, the way everyone does until they can't. And when authority insists on normal, ask what problem normal is meant to hide. Not with shouting, not with urgency, just with the quiet curiosity you might use when reading an instruction manual that seems to be missing a page. Tomorrow, remember the simplest lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous cloud is the one you are told not to look for, because it isn't shaped like danger. It's shaped like weather. The band packs up. Someone wipes the mouthpiece of a trumpet as if cleanliness can erase memory. The banners fold into rectangles and disappear into storage, where they will wait patiently for the next time the calendar demands a performance. The street returns to quiet. Lilacs keep doing their lilac thing, completely uninterested in politics. And the air keeps its invisible memory drifting gently through the city as if it could go on forever. As if you could keep listening forever, as if the world could soften into a steady sleepy hum and simply continue. You might not expect a parade to be powered mostly by not knowing things, but that is often what a parade runs on. Not the music, not the banners, not the shiny buttons on uniforms. The real fuel is the shared assumption that today is a normal day, and that normal days do not carry hidden instructions in the air. So let your room stay quiet. Let your breathing be the only thing that has a schedule. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can subscribe. If you're not, that's honestly the ideal outcome. I'm not here to win your attention. I'm here to borrow it gently and then hand it back, warm and slightly bored, like a library book you fell asleep on. On that May Day morning, the first thing most people notice is not danger, it's spring. It's the soft, polite brightness of a city trying to look tidy for a holiday. People are dressed for photographs that may or may not be taken. Children are dressed for the part they've been assigned, which is usually small and cheerful. Adults are dressed for the part that is harder to describe, something like cooperative citizen with sensible shoes. The streets have that particular smell of early warmth stone that has stopped being cold, dust that has decided to rise, and the faint sweetness of blossoms doing their calm work. And the strange thing is that all of this is real. The blossoms are real, the music is real, the bright hats are real. The whole ritual is real in the way rituals always are, made of material things you can touch. A banner has weight. A trumpet has a temperature. A child's hand is warm when you hold it. If you are the kind of person who trusts what can be held, this day gives you plenty to trust. Meanwhile, the invisible part of the day is also real, but it doesn't behave like a banner or a trumpet. It behaves like air. Which is to say, it behaves like something you never truly notice unless it stops. Air is the most talented background actor in human history. It never demands applause. It never insists on a close-up. It just carries everything, all the time, quietly, without filing a report about it. Most marchers don't have clear information, only atmosphere. It's a useful word, atmosphere. It sounds like a mood, like lighting, like music, like the emotional color of a room. But atmosphere is also, very literally, the thing you're standing inside. You're always inside it. You can't step out of it the way you step out of a building. You can't put it on a shelf. You can only keep breathing it the way you keep listening to a clock ticking even when you stop paying attention. This is where the boredom becomes dangerous, in the gentlest, most bureaucratic way. People are not told there is radiation in the air, because that sentence would require a second sentence, and then a third, and then an action, and actions create mess. Instead, people receive something softer and more confusing. Nothing. A blank space where a warning could have been. A smooth continuation of routine, and routines are hypnotic. They are like lullabies that were written by a committee. If someone does notice something odd, it is usually a small thing that can be explained away. A park that is suddenly closed. A phrase that sounds strangely careful. A pause in a conversation that lingers a bit too long. But humans are excellent at explaining things away, because explaining things away lets you keep your plan for the day. And the plan for the day matters because the plan is concrete. The plan is, meet here, stand there, walk forward, smile when told. It's very simple. It's almost soothing, like assembling flat-pack furniture when you have all the screws. There is also the quiet social rule that curiosity can be rude. Not always, but sometimes. Especially in a system where questions have consequences. A question can be interpreted as criticism. Criticism can be interpreted as disloyalty. Disloyalty is not a comfortable coat to wear in public, so people wear something else, polite silence. They keep their faces neutral. They keep their comments small. They keep their uncertainty folded up neatly, like a handkerchief tucked into a pocket. And then you have the little domestic decisions that look harmless on the surface because they are the same decisions families make every day. Windows are shut. Not dramatically just shut because the air feels cool, or because the street feels loud, or because a neighbor is frying something and it smells like old oil. A mother brushes a child's hair. A father adjusts a collar. Someone wipes a smudge off a cheek with a thumb and then immediately regrets it because now the thumb is dirty. These are ordinary moments, and that is the problem. Ordinary moments are persuasive. They convince you the world is stable. You could say the parade itself is a kind of group agreement not to look too closely at what cannot be seen. A public holiday is a performance of normal, and performances have rules. You clap at the right time. You stand in the right place. You smile when the camera might be watching. Even if there is no camera, the feeling of being watched can be enough. It's like holding your posture when someone walks by, even if you don't actually care what they think. The body does it anyway. The body is obedient. It likes instructions. In a crowd, the mind becomes even more obedient because crowds are comforting. If everyone else is doing something, it feels safe to do it too. There's a soft logic to it, the logic of schools of fish and flocks of birds. You don't have to know why you're moving. You just move. And if you ever want a mildly unsettling bedtime thought, consider how many human actions are just move. Walk to work, line up here, wait there, hold this, sign that, smile, keep walking. It's not evil. It's just efficient. It's the world's most boring magic trick. And the air keeps doing air things. The cloud overhead, if we call it a cloud at all, does not have the decency to look like trouble. It doesn't darken like a storm. It doesn't rumble. It doesn't arrive with a villain's theme music. It drifts the way laundry smells drift out of a window, or the way someone's cigarette smoke drifts down a hallway, soft and almost lazy. That is what makes it so hard to respond to. Your senses are built to notice obvious threats. Sharp teeth, loud sounds, sudden movement. Your senses are not built to notice a particle doing its quiet work. There is a particular kind of helplessness and dangers you cannot feel. The body keeps breathing like a loyal employee who has not been told the building is on fire. The skin feels the same. The mouth tastes the same. The eyes see the same bright hats and the same lilac petals and the same gentle sunlight reflecting off a brass instrument. The nervous system, that ancient alarm system, stays calm because the alarms require inputs and the inputs are not arriving. So people learn later that they were exposed without noticing, and this creates a strange emotional aftertaste. It's not only fear, it's also embarrassment sometimes. A quiet shame that doesn't really belong to anyone, but still appears like a stain you can't remember making. People can feel foolish for trusting the day, even though trusting the day is what humans do. Trusting the day is how you survive most days. If you distrusted every breath, you would never sleep. And sleep, as we know, is the point here. But on that day, sleepiness is exactly what the system needs from people. A kind of civic drowsiness. Not literal sleep in the street, although that would certainly make the parade less tidy, more like mental sleep. A soft, compliant fog. A willingness to accept that if something were wrong, someone important would tell you. And since no one is telling you, everything must be fine. This is where the timing becomes quietly absurd, in a way that almost deserves a dry little chuckle, if we were allowed to chuckle loudly. The holiday celebrates labor. It celebrates the worker, the builder, the miner, the factory hand, the person whose body does hard things on purpose. Meanwhile, the most significant work happening in the background is invisible, uninvited, and not being paid. The air is carrying a message no one wants to read. It's like receiving a letter in a language you don't know, and instead of translating it, you use it to level a wobbly table leg, because at least then it becomes useful. If you imagine the officials who plan the day, you can picture them surrounded by lists. A list of routes, a list of speeches, a list of who stands where and for how long. And lists are calming to the kind of mind that likes control. A list suggests the world is knowable. A list suggests that if you follow the steps, the outcome will behave. But the air is not on the list. The air refuses to be itemized. You can measure it, yes, but measurement takes time, and time is something the calendar does not like to donate. And so, in the street, the parade continues as a soft lesson in how easily normal can be staged. Children wave flags with small wrists that get tired quickly. Adults smile with faces that are practicing not just joy, but correctness. The band plays music that echoes off buildings, and echoes are comforting because they make the world feel solid. A drumbeat says, "This is happening." A trumpet says, "This is official." A banner says, "This has a meaning." And meanwhile, the meaning is being rewritten quietly, like ink spreading on paper when you accidentally leave a wet pen lying down. Some people later will describe feeling that something was off, and that's always interesting, because off is the most human measurement unit. It's not a number. It's not a chart. It's not an instrument reading. It is the internal sense that the room has changed temperature even though the thermometer hasn't moved. You can't prove off, you can only feel it. And in a society that trains people to distrust their own feelings, off becomes something you swallow and store away. Others will remember the day as pleasant, and that is also true in a way that feels uncomfortable. The sun did shine. The lilacs did bloom. People did laugh, softly, in the way people laugh when they are outside with neighbors, and there is music, and it is spring. This is part of what makes history so hard to hold. Two truths can exist in the same hour. A day can be lovely and harmful at the same time. The mind dislikes this. The mind wants one label per day, like a file folder. But reality is messy. Reality is a drawer full of mixed socks. And then, after the parade, people go home. They take off shoes, they hang coats, they wash hands. Washing hands is one of the most comforting actions humans have ever invented. It makes you feel clean, even if the problem is not on your hands. It makes you feel like you have done something. Water runs. Soap foams. You rinse. The ritual is small and satisfying, like completing a tiny task and checking it off in your head. Some families might do extra cleaning without knowing why. A wet cloth on a windowsill. A sweep of the floor. Boots left by the door. Jackets brushed as if they're dusty. And it's almost sweet, in a tragic sort of way, how people reach for the tools they have. If the thread is invisible, you treat it like dust, because dust is the most familiar invisible thing. Dust can be defeated with water and effort. Dust responds to a broom. Dust has the courtesy to gather in corners. Radiation, unfortunately, does not respect corners. If someone in the household is a doctor or an engineer, or just a person who has heard a whisper from another whisper, advice might be offered in the softest way possible. Not an announcement, not a warning. Just a suggestion like maybe keep the kids inside a little more, maybe wash more, maybe avoid rain. It sounds like overly cautious parenting, like the kind of advice someone gives after reading one anxious magazine article, and that's part of why it's easy to ignore. Real danger is supposed to sound like danger. It is supposed to knock on the door and introduce itself. This danger does neither. It just exists patiently, like a policy no one voted on. There's also the quiet social pressure to not be the first to panic. Panic is expensive. Panic makes you look foolish if you're wrong. Panic makes you look disloyal if you're right. So people adopt the most common human coping strategy. They mirror the calm around them. They borrow calm from neighbors. They borrow calm from television. They borrow calm from officials who speak in that flat, confident tone that suggests the world is under control, even when the words themselves don't contain much information. And if you want a soft modern analogy, just for the sake of gentle recognition, think of those times when your phone says no service, but everyone around you keeps scrolling anyway, as if scrolling itself will summon a signal. The action continues even when the connection is gone, because the habit is stronger than the reality. A parade is like that. A parade is the act of scrolling through normal, hoping the page loads. Eventually, of course, the larger reality pushes in. Evacuations, official updates that shift from certainty to caution. Words like iodine that appear too late to feel like comfort. Maps with shaded zones that look strangely neat for something that is not neat at all. But the part that stays with people often is not the technical detail. It's the memory of walking under spring light and not knowing. Not knowing and being expected not to know, and performing not knowing as if it were a civic duty. So let this be the soft point we hold gently tonight without tightening around it. The quietest harm is sometimes the harm that feels like nothing at the time. Not because nothing is happening, but because your body is not built to read the language. And because systems, when they are afraid of disorder, will often choose the comfort of a performance over the inconvenience of truth. Breathe in slowly, the air in your room, the safe air you have chosen, the air that belongs to your present. Breathe out and let the parade sounds drift away, the brass warming up, the shoes on pavement, the banners folding and unfolding like slow fabric wings. The day moves on. The city returns to its ordinary chores. The lilacs keep blooming like they have no awareness of history at all. And the mind, tired from holding too many invisible possibilities, can do what it does best at night: loosen its grip, soften its focus, and let the thoughts pass by like quiet clouds that do not need to be named. You might not expect a medieval night to be managed with something as delicate as dripping wax, but for a long time, the dark was basically scheduled by candles. Not by romance, not by moonlight, not by heroic torches held aloft in dramatic stone corridors, just candles. Quiet, ordinary, slightly smoky candles, doing the dull work of turning time into puddles. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the outside world keep its noise somewhere else, like a neighbor's dog barking politely at the concept of silence. And if you are still awake by the time I start talking about candle thickness and wax inventories, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. Medieval scribes would have understood your hesitation. They wrote a lot of things down, but like and subscribe was not one of them. Picture a monastery or a large household in Europe, where the day is not guided by glowing screens or tiny buzzing notifications, but by bells, prayers, and the stubborn fact that the sun goes away. Night arrives the way it always does, quietly, without asking permission, and everyone has to deal with it, using tools that are, frankly, a bit needy. Candles need protection from drafts. They need someone to light them. They need to be watched, because they are both useful and annoyingly committed to becoming fire in the wrong place. And yet, they are the standard. If you want to read, copy, sew, or simply walk through a hallway without meeting a table corner with your knee, you need wax and flame. The interesting part is that candles are not just light. They are also time, because time is easiest to measure when it does something visible. A candle changes shape. It shortens, it drips. It leaves behind a little record of its own disappearance. And people notice this because people always notice when something predictable keeps shrinking. It's the same reason modern humans stare at phone batteries like anxious priests reading omens. A candle's length is a kind of reassurance. It tells you, in a very slow and patient way, that you are moving forward. So some places used candle clocks, which sounds charming but is really just a candle with markings. You mark off intervals, sometimes with lines on the candle itself, sometimes with metal pins stuck in at measured heights. As the candle burns down, the pins fall, clinking onto a tray, and it's not dramatic. It's not a gong. It's a small, tired little sound that says, yes, another portion of time has been consumed. It is like the universe tapping you gently on the shoulder to remind you is still doing physics. Of course, this only works if your candles are consistent. And consistent is a big demand to place on medieval manufacturing, where consistency is often more of a dream than a product feature. Wax varies. Wicks vary. Even the air varies because drafts are basically free-range creatures in stone buildings. A candle might burn fast if the wick is fat, or slow if the wax is dense, or unevenly if the room is making up its own wind. So the candle clock is always a little bit of a negotiation. It's timekeeping with a shrug. It's saying approximately now, which is honestly a very humane way to handle existence. And yet, people tried. They tried because schedules matter when your day is built from routine. Monasteries divided time into hours for prayer, work, and rest. But those hours weren't always identical 60-minute blocks the way we imagine them now. They were often tied to daylight, to seasons, to bell patterns. Night needed its own structure because night can make a person drift. And drifting is dangerous when your job is copying text that you would very much like to keep readable. Now drift with me from the chapel into the storeroom, because the storeroom is where the true personality of candle time reveals itself. You can't run a candle-based schedule without a candle supply, and supply means accounting. It means someone counting. It means someone writing down numbers that will never be sung about. The heroic age of wax is mostly an age of ledgers. Beeswax, for example, is the fancy option. It burns cleaner. It smells nicer. It is associated with churches and wealth, partly because bees are not easy employees. Bees don't work overtime because you ask nicely. They do what they do when they do it, and they pay you in honey and wax with a casual indifference that would impress a modern contractor. These wax candles can be brighter and less smoky than tallow candles, which are made from animal fat and tend to smell like, well, the memory of an animal having once been very committed to being an animal. So if a monastery is using beeswax, someone has to acquire it. They might keep hives, they might buy wax. They might receive it as rent or a tithe. Wax appears in records like a quietly important character, not glamorous, but constantly present. So many pounds of wax, written in a careful hand, as if the wax might argue. Wax doesn't argue. It just sits there, heavy and faintly fragrant, waiting to become time. And there are standards. Not always official standards in the modern sense, but expectations. How thick should a candle be? How long should it last? How much wax is needed for certain nights of the year, winter nights, when darkness is long and the work of staying awake takes more fuel? The answers are never entirely clean, because life is never entirely clean. But the attempt to answer them is very soothing in its own boring way. It's the human desire to turn an unpredictable world into columns and totals. Sometimes households and institutions recorded candle use with the seriousness of people tracking a precious resource. Which it was. If you're thinking it's just a candle, remember that the candle is the difference between we can do things after sunset and we cannot. It is the difference between reading and guessing, between stitching straight and stitching emotionally. Even a small amount of light can stretch a night into something productive, which is a very medieval ambition, to make time behave. And because candles are both time and money, you can get small, dry disputes about them. This is my favorite kind of historical tension, the kind that doesn't throw punches, it just sighs loudly. Someone complains that too many candles are being used in one room. Someone suspects the steward is skimming wax. Someone insists that the choir needs better light because the hymns are not going to sing themselves. And someone else insists the kitchen needs light because soup is also a spiritual experience if you spill it in the dark. You can almost hear the quiet medieval equivalent of modern office arguments. Not who stole my lunch, but who burned the last of the good wax on a task that did not deserve good wax. Somewhere, a responsible person is writing one candle in a margin and feeling deeply burdened by it, and then there is the wick. The wick is the candle's personality. Wicks can be made from linen, hemp, or other fibers. The thickness matters. The twist matters. A poorly made wick can cause sputtering, smoke, or a flame that behaves like it's having a personal crisis. And nothing says, "Please fall asleep," quite like imagining a monk at midnight, squinting at a misbehaving flame, thinking with deep resignation, "This is not a spiritual problem, it is a wick problem." Now, gently, we move into the daily use of these candles, where the boredom becomes almost tender. Lighting a candle is an action that repeats itself so often it becomes invisible. But it is also a moment of attention. Someone strikes a spark. Someone shields the flame with a hand. Someone leans close and watches the wick catch, the way you watch a kettle begin to tremble just before it boils. And then the room changes, not dramatically, just enough. Edges appear. Shadows arrange themselves. The night becomes navigable. Candles are trimmed. Wicks are snuffed and relit. Wax strips are cleaned sometimes. Sometimes they're not cleaned because the floor has already lost the battle against wax and has accepted its new texture. In some places, candle stubs are saved because waste is a sin and also a bad financial strategy. A candle doesn't die. It becomes smaller, then it becomes a stub, then it becomes an ingredient for a new candle, like time being recycled into more time. If you've ever saved the last bit of soap in the shower and pressed it onto a new bar so it doesn't go to waste, you understand the feeling. It's not about money alone. It's about not letting useful material disappear without a final attempt at usefulness. Medieval people did this with wax, the way modern people do it with chargers and spare batteries and tiny screws you keep, just in case. The human mind loves a just in case. It is the mind's version of a blanket. And candle clocks, those marked candles, create their own quiet rituals. If pins are used, someone has to set the pins. Someone has to decide the spacing. Someone has to accept that the pins will fall at slightly different times depending on the mood of the flame. The sound of a pin dropping is not a trumpet, it's a small metallic tick. A tiny reminder. And it can be oddly comforting because it means the candle is doing its job. It means time is passing in an orderly, measurable way, which is rare and therefore soothing. Of course, the candle is also a small danger. Fire is always a threat, and medieval buildings could be full of wood, textiles, straw, and other things that are very willing to become smoke. So candles are watched, candle rules exist. Don't leave a candle unattended is a principle that transcends centuries, because humans have been setting their own homes on fire for as long as they had homes in fire. It's one of our most consistent traditions. So you might find candle holders designed to catch wax. You might find lanterns used to carry flames safely. You might find instructions, quiet, practical instructions about how many candles should be burning, where, and when. It is a kind of choreography, not ballet. More like the slow choreography of not ruining everything. And when you have enough of these tiny rules, you start to see how night itself becomes a managed space. Not a wild darkness, but a darkness with pockets of light, each pocket associated with a duty. Light in the scriptorium for copying, light in the kitchen for late work, light in the chapel for prayer, light in a corridor so someone can move from one duty to another without collecting bruises like souvenirs. Now drift, very gently, into the human side of it, not the dramatic human side, but the mild and sleepy side. Imagine the people whose job includes being awake near a candle. A monk copying a manuscript, eyes tired, hands steady because they have practiced steadiness. A servant walking a hallway with a candle and a small awareness that wax will drip on their hand if they tilt it wrong. A nun checking that a flame is properly extinguished, because a properly extinguished flame is a quiet kind of mercy. There's also the subtle hierarchy of light. Better wax for more important spaces. Better light for more important tasks. Dimmer light for less important work, or for spaces where light is considered unnecessary. And that hierarchy can become moralized because humans moralize everything. If the chapel has bright beeswax and the kitchen has smoky tallow, the message isn't stated out loud, but it is felt. This work is holy. This work is still work. It's like modern buildings where the executive floor has better chairs. No one calls it theology, but the chairs speak. And then, when the night is done, when the candle has done its quiet shrinking, someone snuffs it. Snuffing is such a gentle verb. It sounds like a small animal. The flame disappears. Smoke curls upward in a thin ribbon, as if the candle is writing its final sentence in the air. The room returns to darkness, but now it's a familiar darkness. It's the darkness that comes after effort, which feels different from the darkness that arrives uninvited. The next day, the wax situation will be assessed again. How many candles are left? How much wax remains? How much will be needed? And this is where the record part of our sleepy little topic comes in, the fact that some of these details survive. In accounts and rules, in the quiet margins of documents that were never meant to be exciting. History often preserves grand events, but it also preserves the shopping list of the past. And the shopping list is sometimes more honest than the epic poem. We know about wax because people wrote about wax. They wrote about it the way people write about taxes, not lovingly, but carefully. A record of payments for candles. A note about wax deliveries. A complaint about shortage. A reminder to store wax properly so mice don't get weirdly involved in your lighting strategy. Yes, mice. Mice can chew on anything, and their participation in history is almost always unwanted. And sometimes you see the quiet intersection of candle time with larger systems. If wax prices rise, institutions adjust. If supply is disrupted, people burn tallow instead of beeswax. If the winter is long, candle usage increases because the night has more hours to be lit. It's a very simple chain of cause and effect. Not dramatic, just persistent. Like the way you use more heating when it's cold, and then you look at the bill and feel a small philosophical sadness. There's also the philosophical angle, which medieval people were very good at, even when it came to dull objects. A candle is an easy metaphor. It burns down, it shortens, it disappears. It can represent life, time, devotion, fragility, or the fact that your room smells faintly of smoke now. But in practice, the candle is mostly a tool. And I like that. I like the idea that even in highly symbolic cultures, many people were simply thinking, I need this light to keep working. It's grounding. It's human. It's the kind of thought that fits well with sleep because it doesn't demand a conclusion. So let's end with a small bedtime oath, the kind that belongs in a jar with other plain truths. Keep the grand metaphors in one jar: candles as life, candles as the soul, candles as the passage of time. Keep the practical facts in another: wax is counted, wicks are trimmed, pins fall with tiny sounds, smoke curls when a flame goes out. If history ever feels too heroic, follow the light source. Ask who paid for it. Ask who carried it. Ask who counted it. And then, very gently, let the image dim. Let the candle shrink in your mind until it becomes a quiet stub of warm light. Let the last thin ribbon of smoke drift upward and vanish. The night returns to its soft shape. The hallway stops needing to be navigated. The ledger closes. The pen stops dropping. The room stays still, and you don't have to measure anything at all. You might not expect a city to be tucked into the night by someone carrying a ladder and a long pole, but for a long time that was the plan. Not a poetic plan, not a glamorous plan, Just a municipal, mildly city plan. A person walks the same streets every evening, and the streetlights behave one by one like sleepy eyelids. If your room is quiet, keep it that way. Let the outside world do its clattering somewhere far away, preferably in a different century. And if you still awake by the time I start describing the exact shape of a lamplighter's pool, you can subscribe. Or don't. The lamplighter would not take it personally. He has already been ignored by most of the city, which is sort of the point. Imagine an evening in a big 19th century city London is a convenient one, because London loves systems and sit with equal devotion. The light begins to thin. Shop windows lose their confidence. People hurry, not because they're heroic, but because they've learned that cobblestones are less charming when you can't see them. And then, quietly, the routine starts. A lamplighter appears like a small moving punctuation mark on the street, carrying the tools of a job that has basically convinced darkness to wait outside. He has a route. Not an adventurous route. A route that repeats until it becomes muscle memory. Like a commute you could do half asleep, because, in a way, that's exactly what it is. The route might be written down by someone in the office who never touches a lamp in his life, but who deeply enjoys the idea that lamps can be managed. Streets are divided. Posts are numbered, responsibilities are assigned. It's the kind of organization that makes a city feel modern, which is a fancy way of saying less likely to trip over itself. Now, the lamps themselves are not trying to be mystical. They are pieces of hardware. Some earlier lamps were oil lamps, whale oil if you wanted to pay for a smell that felt like the sea had opinions, or vegetable oils if you wanted a more modest aroma. Then, increasingly, gas lamps arrive. Coal gas, manufactured gas, piped gas. A whole invisible network under the street, like the city is secretly learning to breathe through tubes. A gas lamp looks calm, but it's actually a tiny controlled argument between fuel and air. Someone opens a valve. Gas flows up, the flame catches. Glass panes or a little enclosure tries to keep wind from turning the flame into a nervous flicker. And if everything goes well, the street gets a soft circle of light that doesn't feel like daylight. It feels like permission. Permission is important, because people don't just need light to see. They need light to feel that the night is being supervised. The human brain loves supervised darkness. It relaxes more easily when it believes someone somewhere is on duty. The lamplighter becomes a moving signal that the city has not given up. The city is still attempting to function, and that attempt is oddly comforting. Of course, the lamplighter is also dealing with a lot of tiny annoyances. Wind that blows exactly when it shouldn't. Rain that makes everything damp and uncooperative. Glass panes that fog or sit up until the lamp looks like it's thinking hard about nothing. And then there's the equipment. The long pole sometimes with a hook, sometimes with a little torch or taper arrangement, used to reach the lamp as mechanism without climbing like a squirrel. If you're picturing it as elegant, it's not. It's practical. It is a person poking a piece of city furniture until it does what it is supposed to do. It's like turning a stubborn router off and on again, but the router is made of iron, and the on is fire. In many places, lamplighters were paid modest wages. This is a gentle way of saying they were not paid like the heroes of the industrial age. They were paid like people who existed to prevent complaints. And complaints were absolutely part of the ecosystem. If a lamp stayed unlit, someone would notice. If a lamp burned too weakly, someone would complain. If a lamp smoked too much, someone would complain in a way that involved hand gestures. And if a lamp went out at the wrong time, someone might complain with the kind of moral outrage usually reserved for betrayal. So the job comes with rules. Lighting times, extinguishing times, expectations about how bright a lamp should be. Sometimes even little inspections, because once a city discovers it can inspect something, it becomes emotionally attached to inspecting it. There might be a supervisor who checks that lamps are lit properly, like a teacher checking homework. And the lamplighter who did not invent the night gets judged as if he did. The timing is especially amusing in a quiet, sleepy way, because time in the 19th century is still becoming what we think of as time. Clocks exist, yes. But synchronized public time, railway time, standardized time takes effort. Meanwhile, the sun sets differently across seasons, and cities try to pretend this is not inconvenient. So lighting schedules shift. Some lamps are lit earlier in winter, later in summer. The lamplighter learns the city's seasonal moods through the simple fact of when his work begins. And then there is maintenance, which is where boring history truly blossoms. Lamps need cleaning. Glass panes collect soot and grime. Burners clog, valves leak. A gas network can be temperamental, like a large invisible animal under the street, occasionally deciding to behave oddly. Some lamplighters did small maintenance tasks themselves. Others reported problems to separate crews. Either way, the romance of streetlight is, in practice, the romance of wiping dirty glass and not inhaling too much of anything. Sometimes the city kept careful records, numbers of lamps, costs of fuel, repair logs, replacement parts. It's not the sort of paperwork that makes your heart race. It's the sort of paperwork that makes your eyelids heavy, which is perfect. So many lamps on this street, so much gas consumed, one globe replaced. A globe is what the glass enclosure might be called, which makes it sound like a planet. In reality, it's a city glass bubble that needs scrubbing. And yes, scrubbing is a theme, because a lamp that isn't cleaned becomes a dim lamp. A dim lamp creates a dim street. A dim street creates a city that feels less safe, and then people start imagining that the lamplighter is personally responsible for every shadow. Again, the lamplighter did not invent shadows, but he is the one holding the pole, so the blame finds him easily. There are also little quirks. Some lamps could be lit from a central supply and controlled in clusters, depending on the system and the period. Some had individual stopcocks. Some had tiny access doors. Some were mounted high enough that you needed a ladder, which the lamplighter drags along like a quiet companion. The ladder is not symbolic, it is just heavy. It's the kind of heavy that makes you respect the past in a very unpoetic way. And in the middle of all this routine, the city does what cities do. It continues to produce small obstacles. A cart parked too close to a lamppost, a street under repair, a puddle that decides to become a lake, a group of children watching the lamplighter with the fascinated seriousness of people seeing a magic trick. Except the trick is the lamp is on now. Sometimes children imitated the job, because children imitate everything. And because carrying a pole and making things light up is objectively a decent fantasy career. Now drift with me into the softer, quieter strangeness. The lamplighter is part of the city as nightly rhythm in a way that people barely notice until he is missing. When the lamps are all lit properly, no one writes poems about him. They walk. They talk. They go home. The light becomes background like a constant low hum. But if the lamps fail, if the gas pressure drops, if the weather is violent, if a labor dispute interrupts service, then suddenly the darkness feels louder. People realize they were leaning on that mild glow the way you lean on a railing without thinking. And there's a small irony here. The lamplighter is doing a job that makes the night less frightening, but the job itself is done in the night. He walks through streets when other people are heading indoors. He stands under lampposts while wind pushes at his coat. He repeats the same motions: reach, open, ignite, confirm, move on. It's like a lullaby made of tasks, sung to a city that doesn't quite know it's being soothed. In some places, electricity begins to arrive later, and the lamplighter's world slowly fades. Electric lights don't need a person with a pole. They need wiring, stations, switches, and a whole new kind of invisible labor. The romantic image changes. But for a while, these systems overlap. Gas lamps still glow while electric lights begin appearing in richer districts or main roads. The city becomes patchwork, some streets softly golden, some harshly bright, some still just night. If you listen closely, the boring part is also the human part. A person whose job is to create a predictable environment for strangers. A person whose success is measured by how little anyone thinks about him. That's a very modern kind of job, honestly. It's customer service for darkness. And like all customer service, it is mostly about preventing small problems from turning into large feelings. So how do we know any of this? Because cities love records, they love budgets, they love contracts for gas companies, debates about public lighting costs, reports about accidents, arguments about whether brighter lamps reduce crime or simply make people feel like something is being done. There are maps showing lamp locations. There are committee discussions that probably lasted longer than anyone wanted. There are maintenance notes. The paper trail is thick enough to insulate a room, which, again, is ideal bedtime material. And then there are the small traces. Old lampposts still standing in some places, decorative now like retired workers wearing their uniforms for photos. Old regulations, old job descriptions. A few memoir mentions here and there, like a soft ripple on a pond. None of it shouts. It just sits quietly and says, yes, the night used to be managed differently. So keep the facts in one jar: roots, poles, ladders, valves, soot, the steady repetition of lighting and extinguishing. Keep the atmosphere in another: soft circles of light, damp streets, the feeling that a city can be gently guided into sleep. If history ever tries to impress you too loudly, look for the person doing the repetitive work that makes the impressive thing function. And now, very gently, let the last lamp on the route flare into steadiness. Let the lamplighter step back, check it without pride, and move on. Let the street stop needing your attention. Let the glow become background, the pole lowers. The ladder stops scraping the stones. The city, in its slow mechanical way, settles. And your own room can stay still, while the old lights keep burning somewhere far away, quietly, pointlessly, beautifully ordinary. You might not expect a nation to start arguing about daylight as if it were a luxury item, but that is exactly the kind of thing humans will do when given enough paperwork and enough time. There is a particular sort of historical moment where the main character is not a king, not a battle, not a ship, but a rectangle of glass sitting quietly in a wall, minding its own business, letting in a little light, and somehow becoming a financial problem. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the soft darkness do what it does best. And if you were still awake by the time I began describing how a tax assessor might count windows with the seriousness of a person counting sheep, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. The windows will continue to exist either way. They have an impressive talent for staying put. In late 17th century England, the state is always looking for money in the way a person looks for a missing sock. Slightly irritated, oddly determined, and willing to check places that seem unreasonable. There are wars, there are debts, there are administrative habits forming, the kind that lead to new forms, new stamps, and new ways of turning ordinary life into something that can be measured. So at a certain point, someone has the tidy idea that a house's windows can stand in for wealth, because windows are visible, countable, and unlike coins, they cannot be quietly hidden in a teapot. The logic is almost soothingly simple. More windows usually means a bigger house. Bigger house usually means more money. More money usually means, in the mind of a government, a slightly higher obligation to contribute. And so a window tax appears, with a baseline charge plus additional amounts depending on how many windows a building has. The state, which cannot see your bank account, can at least see your fachade. It is like the earliest form of a public profile. Your house displays your lifestyle choices in glass, and in a way, it makes the street into a ledger. You can walk along and read the neighborhood like a slow architectural spreadsheet. Here is a small cottage with a few modest windows. Here's a townhouse with neat symmetry and a row of sash windows that look as if they've been combed. Here's a grander place with enough glass to suggest that someone inside has never had to pretend a meal was fine. When it wasn't, it's all very visual, which means it's also very tempting for officials. Now imagine the work of assessing this. The tax is not collected by intuition. It becomes a job. People need to count, record, enforce. Someone has to decide what counts as a window, which sounds like a question that should take 5 seconds, but in reality can occupy the human mind for weeks if allowed. Is a small pane in a door a window? Is a skylight a window? What about a window that has been bricked up, but still faintly outlines its old shape, like a ghost that refuses to leave? You can almost hear the quiet debates held in rooms that were probably a bit too warm, with pens scratching as if the pen itself is annoyed. Homeowners naturally respond the way homeowners always respond when a new cost arrives. They become creative. Some pay, some complain in polite letters, some complain in less polite conversations, and some do what seems obvious once you remember that bricks exist. They reduce their window count. They literally remove daylight from their own buildings, or they block it, or they design around it because the math works out on paper, even if it feels strange in the lungs. So you get this peculiar architectural phenomenon, bricked up windows, especially on older buildings that were constructed with generous light in mind. A window becomes a liability. A piece of sky is suddenly taxable. And the easiest way to lower the bill is to close the eye. The wall, which had been punctured for light and air, gets patched like a small wound. From the street, it looks like a face with one eyelid sewn shut. Inside, rooms grow dimmer, the corners thicken. The difference is not cinematic, it's domestic. It's someone squinting while sewing. It's someone reading closer to the fire. It's a child learning that the brightest spot in the room is now the doorway. People adapt because people always adapt, but the adaptation is quietly absurd. You are living in a world where the government has made sunlight feel like a premium feature. There's also a subtle social performance happening. Windows have always been about more than light. They are about display. They are about showing that you can afford glass and frames and maintenance and cleaning. They are about the gentle message sent outward that your life has space and air and perhaps a view. So when windows become taxed, the message shifts. Now a window says, not only I have light, but also I have light and I'm paying for it, which is a very modern vibe, honestly. And the tax system itself grows into a familiar shape. Exemptions for the poor, thresholds, adjustments, rules that multiply over time like ivy. Some smaller dwellings are exempt. Some people try to qualify for exemption. Some buildings are counted differently. The state does what it always does. It builds a structure of categories, and then it hires people to argue about those categories. The window, once a simple opening, becomes a line item. Meanwhile, builders and architects notice. They don't have to be rebellious to respond. They just have to be practical. If future owners are going to be penalized for having too many windows, then perhaps new buildings will be designed with fewer. Perhaps windows will be placed strategically or combined or made in ways that reduce the counted number. Perhaps the facade will maintain symmetry with false panels where windows might have been, like a polite lie told in brick and plaster. Your house can still look grand, but with fewer taxable eyes. The most interesting part is how quickly something like this can reshape normal life. People start discussing window numbers the way they might discuss rent. How many windows does your place have? It becomes a question with an economic undertone. The state has turned a basic element of comfort into a metric. And once a metric exists, people begin to optimize around it as if they're trying to beat a very slow, very expensive game. If you step back, you can see the whole arrangement as a kind of early user interface for taxation. The government wants revenue. The public wants to keep its money. Windows are the clickable button that connects those desires. It's not personal, it's procedural. But procedures have consequences, and consequences over time become culture. There are also myths that attach themselves to this story because humans love a myth as much as they love a shortcut. You may have heard the phrase daylight robbery, often claimed to have come from the window tax, as if the government literally stole daylight. It's a perfect phrase for the narrative. It fits like a neatly cut piece of glass. But language history is often less obliging than legend, and the origin of that phrase is not so cleanly tied to windows. That doesn't stop the myth from traveling, though. Myths are like drafts, they find gaps and slip through. And even if the phrase is a myth, the feeling behind it is not entirely fictional. People do experience a kind of theft when a comfortable norm becomes expensive. It's not always dramatic. It's quietly irritating. It's the feeling of paying extra for something you assumed was part of the package. Like discovering your favorite app now charges a subscription for features you didn't realize were features, such as being able to open it without being nagged. The window tax lasts a long time in different forms, evolving across decades. That is another sleepy truth of history. Systems that are annoying but workable tend to persist. People complain, but life goes on, and the government keeps collecting. And new generations inherit the arrangement the way they inherit old furniture. Over time, criticism builds. Some argue it harms health by reducing ventilation and light. Some argue it discourages good building design. Some argue it is simply unfair. Debates happen, and the debates themselves are probably some of the most boring and important parts. Committee hearings, pamphlets, editorials, statistics offered with great confidence. Eventually, in the 19th century, the tax is repealed, which sounds like a clear ending, but it isn't really, because repealing a tax doesn't instantly restore the windows. Bricks do not politely remove themselves. Buildings remain altered. The city keeps the imprint of the policy, like a memory in its skin. You can still see bricked up window shapes on old buildings, especially in parts of Britain and Ireland, and the sight is quietly haunting in a non-scary way. It is like seeing an old scar and realizing the body has a history you can read if you steer gently, and then there's the human layer again. Imagine the households that live through it, the daily compromises, the way a room feels in winter when a window has been blocked. The way sun changes, the way air becomes a little heavier, the way someone might say, "we'll be fine," while moving a chair closer to the remaining light, like a plant that has learned to chase the sun across the floor. It also changes what nice looks like. If windows cost more, then having many windows becomes an even clearer sign of wealth. A bright home becomes a status symbol with a receipt attached. That means class becomes visible in a literal way. Who lives in light, who lives in dimness, who can afford to keep their windows open to the world. The city becomes a map of brightness. It's not the sort of inequality people always talk about, but it's the kind you can feel in your eyes. And if you're half asleep, you may start to notice how many historical systems involve counting something on the outside of a person as life rather than understanding the inside. Windows, hearths, chimneys. These were all used as proxies for wealth at different times. The state is like someone trying to guess how well you're redoing by looking at your shoes. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it always produces paperwork, and paperwork is the true engine of civilization. Now, drift with me through a slow walk down a street where some houses still carry the old bricked outlines. The outlines are often symmetrical because people love symmetry even when it's useless. A bricked up window still wants to match its neighbors. The facade keeps pretending. It's like a social mask, but for architecture, and that pretense is strangely tender. Even when people remove light to save money, they still wanted the house to look like it belonged in the rhythm of the street. Inside, imagine the small adaptations. Mirrors placed to catch the remaining daylight. Light-colored paint used to stretch brightness. Curtains chosen not for style, but for how they behave with weak sun. These are the quiet arts of living under a rule you didn't choose. And because humans are humans, some of these adaptations probably became aesthetic preferences. People tell themselves they like it cozy, they like it dim, they like the way candlelight looks against the wall. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's survival disguised as taste. And then, because history can't resist a mild tangent, there's the technology of windows themselves. Glass production improves over time. Sash windows become common, sliding up and down with counterweights, which is a mechanical detail that feels oddly calming to think about. A window is not just a hole. It's a device. It has parts. It can break. It can stick. It can rattle in wind. It requires maintenance. So even without tax, a window is a commitment. Tax just makes the commitment louder. The window tax era also gives us a certain kind of moral argument that repeats across centuries. Should public revenue come from things that affect health and comfort? Is it acceptable to tax a feature that directly shapes daily living? People will argue about similar questions forever with different objects. Windows become one early example. Today it might be housing space, energy, air conditioning, internet access. The object changes, the feeling stays. The feeling is, why does comfort have a fee attached? If you want an even softer, stranger thought, consider the way the tax encourages a kind of inwardness. Fewer windows means less looking out, less being seen, less connection to the street. A city becomes slightly more closed. People spend more time in the interior. The house turns into a more sealed container. It's not a dramatic psychological transformation, but it's a small tilt. And history is often made of small tilts that accumulate until the whole world feels different. When the tax ends, the world doesn't suddenly become bright and airy. It just becomes possible again to build without that particular penalty. The city slowly changes as buildings are renovated, rebuilt, expanded. New structures come with larger windows as glass becomes cheaper and tastes shift. Light returns in stages like a long, slow morning. But the old bricked outlines remain here and there, patiently, like reminders that policies can shape the physical world in ways that outlast the debates that created them. So keep the facts in one jar: dates, window counts, exemptions, assessors, bricks, the dull arithmetic of a state trying to fund itself. Keep the atmosphere in another: dim rooms, softened street facades, the quiet absurdity of treating daylight like a luxury add-on. And if you ever feel like history is only about big events, remember the small, stubborn shape of a bricked-up window still sitting on an old wall, still telling a story in silence. Now let the street settle. Let the tax forms fade into dust in some archive. Let the last thought be simple and soft. Sometimes the past doesn't shout. Sometimes it just reduces the number of windows in a room and calls it revenue. And if you listen long enough, your mind can drift the way light drifts across a floor slowly, gently, without meaning to arrive anywhere in particular. You might not expect a parade to be one of history's quieter weapons, but sometimes a parade is simply a way of insisting that the calendar is stronger than reality. A brass band warms up somewhere with the patient confidence of people who have warmed up brass bands before, and lilac petals drift along a curb as if they are practicing being innocent. A radio announcer smiles with his voice, because the voice can do that even when the face is tired. And even when the news, if it is news, has been folded away like a napkin and placed out of sight. If your room is still, let it stay that way. Let the stillness do the heavy lifting. And if you feel like it, very gently, tell me where and what time you're listening from. It's a small question, like a quiet knock on a door in a long hallway, and you don't have to answer out loud. Most people never do. The question just sits there, polite, and then drifts away. May Day is supposed to look the same everywhere it is allowed to look the same. Banners that have been stored and unrolled and stored again. Speeches that arrive on schedule, as if they were printed on rails. Children in bright hats, the kind that make a child look like a tiny, cheerful mushroom. Adults standing in crowds with the practiced posture of being seen. It is a holiday that asks the city to pretend it has no doubts, because doubt is difficult to choreograph and very hard to photograph. In Kyiv and other towns, spring air can smell clean enough to trust, and trust is part of the ritual. The air carries a mild dampness from last night's rain or last week's, and it carries the ordinary perfumes of a city waking up. Bread, exhaust, early blossoms, someone's laundry deciding to be outside today. Spring does what it always does, quietly, on schedule. It turns the world soft at the edges, and it makes the future seem like it might be manageable, which is one of spring's favorite little lies. But far to the north, a reactor has already rewritten the weather with invisible ink. This is the kind of fact that sounds like poetry until you remember it is also physics. Radiation does not announce itself with color. It does not arrive with a drum roll. It rides wind the way pollen does, quiet and patient, and it does not care what day the calendar thinks it is. Breathe in 4, out 6, and notice how breathing is always happening, whether or not anyone is officially talking about what's in the air. Rumors move faster than measurements because rumors require only a mouth and a hint of fear. Measurements require instruments, trained hands, paperwork, and a chain of people who must agree that the number matters. And numbers, as you may have noticed, are sometimes treated like opinions. Somewhere a device ticks more quickly than it should. Somewhere a report is written with the careful tone of someone who would like not to be the person who wrote it. Somewhere someone says, very quietly, that maybe children should stay inside, but the sentence is spoken the way people speak when they are testing whether the walls can hear them. And then, like a stamp pressed onto paper, the order arrives. The celebration goes on. The decision is not always delivered with villainy. Often it arrives dressed as normal procedure. Normal procedure is one of the most powerful costumes in history. It looks like calm. It sounds like responsibility. It smells faintly of ink, and it makes people feel that if they follow it, they will not be punished for thinking. If you've ever watched a school assembly happen, you already understand the shape of this. The chairs appear. The children are lined up. The adults adopt expressions that say, "This is fine," and they say it with their eyebrows. Officials want crowds visible because visibility is proof that the state is steady, proof that panic is unnecessary, proof that everything is under control, which is a phrase that often means gently that someone would like you not to ask follow-up questions. So banners are carried like furniture that must be moved every year. Awkward, necessary, familiar. Slogans are held up on poles that have been used before, and the hands gripping them are just hands. People's fingers look the same whether they are holding a flag or holding groceries. Factories march in blocks because blocks look organized, and organization looks safe from a distance. Children wave because children are told to wave. And also because waving is something you can do when you don't know what else you'd be supposed to do with your arms. Parents are told not to worry, and worry becomes impolite, like coughing in a theater. It is one of society's small tricks. If you label worry as rude, people will swallow it. They will smile instead. Smiles are cheap. Smiles cost no extra paper. Smiles do not require a signature. The city learns the soft discipline of public joy, which is joy with rules, joy in rows, joy that knows where to stand. Most marchers have no clear information, only atmosphere, spring light, music, and the sense that asking questions is rude. That sense can be taught quickly. It can be taught in one look from an official, or one whisper from a neighbor, or one memory of how things go for people who insist on being difficult. Some families close windows but still send children out because rules become reflex, and reflex is faster than careful thought. The cloud overhead is not dramatic. It is ordinary air doing ordinary air things, and that ordinariness is part of what makes it so powerful. The body cannot feel most of what harms it. The body is honest, but it is not always informed. And so people march beneath something they cannot see, the way people always have, under microbes, under politics, under the quiet decisions of strangers. There is something almost boring about it in the most unsettling way. The world continues with its routines because routines are what humans do when the alternative is standing still and admitting that you don't know what to do next. In a system built on hierarchy, bad news travels vertically before it travels outward. Reports, approvals, signatures, these are the elevators of information, and they stop at floors you don't have access to. Local officials wait for Moscow. Moscow waits for certainty. Certainty arrives late, wearing a coat that smells like bureaucracy. And in the meantime, the street waits for instructions because the street has been trained to wait. The street is very good at waiting. You can train a whole city to wait if you do it long enough. Admitting danger publicly risks looking weak, and weakness is treated like a contagious illness. It spreads out. It loosens discipline. It creates questions, and questions create more questions. And suddenly, your neat parade becomes something messier, something that does not fit well in a newspaper photograph. So the message to the street becomes, continue. Continue the schedule. Continue the music. Continue the waving. Continue being normal, because normal is easier to manage than fear. There are papers involved in this, of course. There are always papers. A memo written in careful language that says very little but implies a great deal. A phone call that ends with, understood, even when understanding is not what happened. A folder moved from one desk to another like a small migrating animal. And perhaps, somewhere, a person who knows the number in a report decides not to say it out loud, because saying it out loud would make it real in a way that ink can avoid. And still, on the human level, small private defenses begin to appear, the way people instinctively build little shelters in their minds. Some doctors and engineers whisper advice in kitchens: wash hands, avoid rain, keep children indoors if you can. The advice is offered like a recipe because recipes feel normal. Do this, then this. A few people improvise protections: wet cloths, extra baths, boots left outside, coats brushed as if they're dusty. It's almost gentle, the way people try to handle something too large with small domestic gestures, like trying to hold back a storm with a broom. Most defenses, though, are psychological. Don't think too hard. Don't talk too loud. Don't be the first to panic. Don't be the person who ruins the mood. The most common shield is ignorance, issued without consent and renewed daily. And ignorance can feel like comfort, especially at bedtime, because it allows the mind to settle. It allows you to say, if it were truly bad, someone would tell me, which is one of the phrases people use when they want to sleep. Days later, the celebration looks unreal in memory, like a photograph taken seconds before a storm. Evacuations expand, not all at once, but in those careful increments that make people feel the world is still being managed. Iodine becomes a word people learn too late, like learning the name of a tool only after you needed it. Official statements slowly change shape, which is what official statements do when the truth is heavy and the room is full of fragile things. And this is where history becomes quietly full of arguments, because the effects are complicated and uneven, and complexity is the perfect hiding place for responsibility. Health consequences do not arrive in tidy rows. They arrive scattered. They arrive in statistics that can be debated, and debates can go on forever, which is convenient if you'd like time to pass. What remains clear is the feeling. A city was asked to perform calm in a moment that needed truth, and performance is easier than honesty when your whole system is built like a stage. There's also the softer aftermath, the one that doesn't fit into dramatic narratives. People go back to work. They wash dishes. They stand in line. They talk about weather because weather is a safe topic and also bitterly relevant. Someone may remember the sound of the band warming up, the bright hats, the banners, and the way the air felt normal. The mind, trying to protect itself, files the memory under spring because spring is a gentler folder than disaster. And then later, the memory gets edited, as memories do. Some people insist they knew. Some people insist they couldn't have known. Some people insist nothing happened because insisting can be a form of control. History is not only what happens. It is also what people are willing to say happened and when and to whom. Over time, the parade becomes a symbol, and symbols are always smoother than reality. Reality has paperwork stuck to it. Reality has awkward details. Reality has the exact texture of a banner pole in a sweating hand. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the small sounds that never make it into speeches. The scrape of shoes on pavement, a child's sleeve brushing another child's sleeve, the flutter of paper as someone adjusts a slogan sign so it faces the camera better, the little coughs people try to hide, the quiet, normal sounds of a city doing what it was told, under a sky that is not doing anything visible at all. Keep facts in one jar. Dates, orders, parades, reports, approvals, the gentle machinery of a hierarchy. Keep emotion in another jar, but don't shake it too hard. Fear, anger, the ache of being misled. These are real, but we don't need to make them loud tonight. Tonight we can simply notice the strange way authority can insist on normal, the way a tired person insists they refine, even when their voice is a little too careful. When someone insists on normal, it can be restful to ask, very softly, what problem normal is meant to hide. Not as an accusation, just as a small curiosity, like wondering why a room suddenly smells like fresh paint. Tomorrow, remember the simplest lesson, the one that doesn't to require a dramatic soundtrack. The most dangerous cloud is sometimes the one you retold not to look for, because looking would mean admitting that the calendar doesn't control the air. The band packs up, the banners fold, the street returns to quiet, and the quiet feels earned, like the end of a long day of standing. The air keeps its invisible memory, and you can let your own thoughts do the same thing the city does after the music stops. Drift back indoors, settle into ordinary stillness, and let the mind go dim at the edges, not because nothing happened, but because sleep is also a kind of small private defense, and you're allowed to have it.